is no silence in death, only the echo of burning worlds. From orbit, the surface of once living planets gleams like molten glass, their continents erased beneath the fire of sanctioned fury. Somewhere, deep within the obsidian halls of a forgotten fortress monastery, a name is crossed out from a data slate. The world has been erased, not by alien invasion nor the slow entropy of time, but by decree. The seal that orders such an ending bears the twin-headed eagle of the Imperium, yet behind it lies something colder than faith. It is the mark of the Inquisition, and when that mark falls upon a planet, there is no plea, no mercy, and no memory. The world ceases not in rebellion or ruin, but in obedience to the unending preservation of mankind. The first rumor came from a Vox transmission so faint it was almost mistaken for static. A message buried beneath frequencies meant for astropathic traffic, coded in a dialect of High Gothic reserved for the Inquisition alone. To most it was nothing. A glitch, a trace of old comms residue. But to the man who caught it, it was the sound of judgment stirring in the dark. Inquisitor Kestel Varn did not sleep anymore. He had not for decades, not since the war on Herrick's III, when the air itself had screamed with demonic syllables. His body was a cathedral of augmentations, his blood half replaced with bioreactive serum to keep his heart from ceasing under the strain of constant vigilance. He stood before the observation window of his command ship, the Judicium Aeternum, gazing down at the world below. A smog-veiled manufactorum planet called Bracchus IX. To any other servant of the Imperium, it would appear ordinary, its surface mottled with furnace cities, its atmosphere heavy with the dust of industry. But Varn saw the corruption beneath. He saw the shadows flickering behind the facade of loyalty, and to him that was all that mattered. He raised a hand to his vox grill, and the servitors around him froze mid-task. The chamber's lumens dimmed in reverence as he spoke. "Bring me the reports," he said, his voice distorted through layers of vox static, a sound like iron grinding against glass. Moments later, a robed acolyte approached, holding a data slate embossed with the sigil of the Ordo Hereticus. Her hands trembled as she extended it toward him. "Confirmed heretical activity in the sub-hives, my lord," she whispered. "Unauthorized worship gatherings, references to the..." She hesitated as if the word itself might invite damnation. "The awakening flame." Varn's eyes flickered with faint light as his cranial implants parsed the data. The pattern was familiar. He had seen it before. Always the same infection beneath different names. The cults spread in the wake of despair, promising revelation, freedom, even mercy. He had learned long ago that heresy did not need truth to thrive. It only needed hunger. Outside the viewport, the planet turned slowly, its night side illuminated by the restless glow of hive spires and plasma refineries. Billions of souls toiling beneath a sky that had long forgotten them. It was not hatred that filled Varn's mind as he watched them. It was duty, the kind that crushed men into relics. "The Mechanicus confirms no Xenos taint," said another voice. This one mechanical, emanating from a cherub servitor floating nearby. "No warp breaches, minimal mutation incidents, probability of systemic heresy. Low." Varn turned slowly. "Low?" His tone was almost a whisper, yet the cherub flinched as if struck. "A world that whispers false prayers into the dark is already lost. It matters not whether the tongue belongs to demon or man." He turned away again, the reflection of his augmetic eye burning faintly against the glass. He knew what came next. The first step was not action, it was thought. The seed of suspicion once planted had only one possible outcome. He began composing his report to the Conclave of Terra, words calculated, formal, unyielding, each phrase a blade honed by necessity. Potential contagion of faith deviation on Bracchus IX. Recommend escalation of observation protocols. Authorization for provisional censure pending verification. It was the language of bureaucracy, but within its measured tone lay the breath of apocalypse. He sealed the data slate with his personal sigil and handed it to the acolyte. Transmit through astropathic relay, encrypt with cipher Omega Null, and make ready the ship's sanctum. We may receive reply within the solar week. The acolyte bowed low, her head nearly touching the floor. As you command, my lord. Varn lingered for a moment longer, watching the flickering storms of plasma that rolled across the planet's upper atmosphere. Every Exterminatus began like this, quiet, procedural, forgettable. A flicker in the vast machine of the Imperium. The hammer did not fall swiftly. It descended in slow, deliberate rhythm, shaped by the weight of 10,000 years of sanctioned slaughter. He remembered Herix III, the day the order had come. The astropath had delivered it while bleeding from the eyes, her mind unraveling from the effort of channeling the inquisitorial seal. Varn had given the command with hands that did not tremble, but afterward, he had stood in the dark, listening as the torpedoes struck, as oceans boiled and continents burned. He could still hear the sound in his dreams, the resonance of a world dying in the name of purity. That night, in the quiet of his chamber, Varn knelt before the flickering, hollow effigy of the Emperor. "Grant me the clarity to see corruption where it hides," he murmured. "Grant me the strength to burn it without hesitation." His prayer was both confession and plea. Somewhere within him, a sliver of his former self still asked whether he was saving humanity or merely reducing it, piece by piece, to ash. The answer never came. Only the hum of the ship's plasma drives, deep and distant, like the pulse of a slumbering god. Days passed in ritual monotony. Reports continued, each one adding another shadow to the tapestry of suspicion. A patrol of the Astra Militarum reported disappearances among the Hive conscripts. The Adeptus Arbites found fragments of scripture that did not match any recognized catechism. The Ecclesiarchy issued denials, their confidence brittle and hollow. By the time the Conclave's reply arrived, the decision had already been made in spirit, if not yet in word. The message came through the ship's sanctum, spoken through the lips of an astropath whose body convulsed with the effort of transmitting. The voice was not her own. It was layered, cold, the echo of 1,000 minds, distilled into command. Inquisitor Kestel Varn, Ordo Hereticus, authorization confirmed. Proceed with escalation under Protocol Ignis, surveillance complete. Initiate phase preparation, await final sanction for Exterminatus. The chamber fell silent. Even the servitors seemed to hesitate. Varn bowed his head. By his light, he whispered. He dismissed his retinue and remained alone beneath the glow of the data shrine. For a long time, he did not move. Outside, Bracchus IX turned through its orbit, ignorant of its fate. Cities thrived. Factories thundered. Sermons rose from the cathedral spires. Life continued unknowing. But for Varn, the moment had already shifted. The world's death warrant had been signed, and though the final authorization was yet to come, the decision was absolute. He did not see himself as judge or executioner. He was a servant of inevitability. The only thing left was to prepare the fire. The order was never given in haste. It came in the form of sacred procedure, a series of invocations and confirmations that wound through the ancient arteries of the Inquisition's command structure. Each word spoken by Varn became another link in a chain that would soon bind an entire world to its doom. The Judicium Aeternum's chapel decks thrummed with ritual activity, and within its sanctum, a choir of servo skulls floated in spiraling formation, chanting binary hymns to sanctify the data links that would carry the authorization through the void. Varn stood at the center of it all, his form half lit by the red glow of the ship's lumen strips. His armor bore the sigils of judgment, scorched into ceramite by purgation flame. Around him knelt his retinue, the interrogator Solène Care, a woman whose voice could flay a confession from a stone; Magos Lexim, the cybernetic priest whose mechadendrites whispered in machine tongue to the ship's core; and Brother Hospitaller Harith, a man of faith who had seen more death than sanctity. They knelt not to him, but to the authority he embodied, the will of the Emperor rendered in flesh. "The Conclave has spoken," Varn said. "We are to commence phase verification. The fires of Bracchus IX must be measured before they are unleashed. Solène, you will descend to the surface. Find the epicenter of this heresy. Burn what you must, but return with truth. Only truth can sanctify what follows." Solène rose, her expression unwavering. Her eyes gleamed beneath the hood of her habit. "And if the truth damns us all, my lord, then damnation will serve the Emperor's purpose," he replied. She bowed and turned, her footsteps echoing through the sanctum's vaults. Varn watched her go, knowing she would not return unchanged, if she returned at all. The surface was no longer a place for the pure. When her gun cutter descended through the ash clouds, the hive spires of Bracchus IX glistened like rusted monoliths. The city stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of steel and smoke. Down below, Manufactoria belched promethium fumes that rolled like storm fronts. The sky itself seemed bruised by centuries of labor. Solène walked among the workers, her rosette hidden beneath her cloak, her voice altered to match the dialect of the underhive. She listened. That was her gift, to hear the heresy that did not name itself. In the lower hab blocks, where the air smelled of oil and decay, whispers spread like contagion. "The flame awakens," they said. "The Emperor will rise anew through the fire." The words were passed in secret, chanted under breath by those too poor to own faith sanctioned by the ecclesiarchy. Solène followed them down into the sump levels, where light dared not linger. There she found them, a circle of the desperate, gathered around a single flickering lumen globe. Their faces were smeared with soot, their eyes wild with devotion. At their center burned a brazier of scrap metal, its flame casting long shadows on the rusted walls. A woman stood before it, her voice rising in fervor. "The throne is not a prison," she cried. "It is the crucible. The Emperor does not wither, he transforms, and through his fire we too shall be remade." The crowd murmured in assent, their voices trembling with a faith born not of rebellion but of longing. Solène felt something stir within her, an unease she could not name. The preacher's words were wrong, dangerous, yet they carried a terrible beauty, the kind that tempted even the righteous. When she revealed her rosette, chaos erupted, the faithful scattered into the shadows, some crying out in prayer, others in rage. Solène moved with practiced precision, her bolt pistol roaring once, twice, 3 times. The preacher fell, her body crumpling beside the brazier. The flame sputtered, then flared higher, as if defying death itself. Solène stared into it for a moment, and in its heart she swore she saw a figure, a silhouette of light and gold, indistinct yet familiar. The Emperor's form, or perhaps only the echo of her own guilt. When she returned to the Judicium Aeternum, her armor bore scorch marks, not from battle but from something stranger, older. It spreads through faith, she told Varn, not through blood, not through lies. They believe the Emperor's suffering is their salvation, that his silence is a sign, not a warning. Varn regarded her in silence. Behind his expressionless mask, his thoughts moved like the gears of a clock. He had seen this before on other worlds. It always began with misplaced reverence. The most dangerous heresies were not born from hatred of the Emperor, but from love twisted beyond recognition. He turned toward the holographic display that shimmered above the sanctum altar. The planetary map rotated, revealing zones of infection spreading like veins of fire. Hive after hive, sector after sector, it would not stop. It never did. "Prepare the codex," he said at last. We move to final recommendation. The words struck like a physical blow to those present. Magos Lexim's mechadendrites stilled. The hospitaller lowered his head in silent prayer. Solène closed her eyes. There was no undoing this. To write a world's name into the Exterminatus Codex was to consign it to non-existence. Varn walked to the command plinth and inserted his seal into the data port. The machine whirred, its runes flaring to life. "By the authority of the Ordo Hereticus," he intoned, his voice echoing through the sanctum. "And under the light of the golden throne, I submit Bracchus IX for censure absolute. Let the fire of his judgment cleanse its sin." The codex accepted the input with a chime that sounded almost like a sigh. Afterward, Varn dismissed his attendants. Alone, he lingered before the map, watching the dying planet turn. In the silence, he felt the weight of every decision he had ever made pressing down upon him. The accumulation of endings. He imagined the faces of the billions below, faceless and countless, living their brief lives under skies that would soon ignite. For a moment, doubt flickered in him like a dying lumen. Was this truly salvation, or had the Imperium become its own executioner? He banished the thought before it could take root. Doubt was heresy. Heresy was fire. And fire was mercy. He turned away from the viewport, his reflection swallowed by darkness. The process had begun. The days that followed passed in a rhythm of mechanical devotion. Every moment aboard the Judicium Aeternum was measured by ritual, by the grinding cadence of preparation for planetary death. The crew did not question their purpose. They had long been conditioned to obedience beyond reason. Even the servitors, those half-human remnants wired into the ship's structure, seemed to vibrate with a sacred tension, their flesh and metal trembling in time with the prayers that coursed through the vox hymn channels. The ship itself had become a cathedral of extinction. Varn spent his hours within the inquisitorial sanctum, surrounded by reliquaries that once belonged to greater men, broken purity seals from the age of apostasy, fragments of armor said to bear the blood of Sebastian Thor, data scrolls written in ink and memory by inquisitors long turned to dust. He moved among them like a ghost of purpose, his augmetic eye glowing faintly in the darkness as he read the words of his predecessors. Each account ended the same way, with ash, silence, and the promise that annihilation was necessary. He found no comfort in them, only affirmation. Solen's report had been sealed and sent to Terra. Its contents were now irrelevant. The Conclave would review, debate, and confirm what was already decided. The decision did not belong to them anymore. It belonged to inevitability. The world below continued its slow rotation beneath the ship's orbit, unaware that its every breath was numbered. When the final sanction arrived, it did not come as thunder. It came as light. A single pulse from the astropathic chamber encoded with the sigil of the Lord Inquisitor himself. The message was short, clinical, merciless. Exterminatus authorized, in his name, let none survive. Varn closed his eyes. The words were a verdict written in eternity. His hand, gloved in black, trembled once before becoming still. He had thought he was ready. He always thought so. Yet each world tore something away that he could never replace. Duty demanded he not notice the loss, but the soul had its own memory. He called his officers to the bridge. The lumen strips dimmed as they entered, the shadows deepening across the metal ribs of the chamber. Solen stood beside him again, her armor still scarred from her descent. The others gathered in silence, the magos humming static hymns, the hospitaller clutching his rosarius as if it might anchor him against the tide of what was to come. Prepare the cyclonic warheads, Varn said. Ensure the torpedo tubes are sanctified before arming. This act must be clean in both function and faith. Magos Lexim's voice buzzed like a swarm of insects. Cyclonic payloads charged, atmospheric resonance calculated, total eradication achievable within standard time frame. Then let it begin. The ship's engines shifted pitch, a deep thrum that reverberated through the hull like the breath of a dying god. Across its decks, servitors recited the litanies of oblivion. The Mechanicus tech priests anointed each warhead with sacred oils drawn from the ship's own plasma veins. The rites were ancient, predating even the memory of their purpose. Each recitation, each ritual, was meant to remind the crew that this was not murder. It was sanctification. Solen watched from the observation platform as the first of the torpedoes was loaded into its launch tube. The warhead glowed faintly beneath the lumen fields, a cylinder of death inscribed with the Imperial Aquila. She whispered a prayer, not for mercy but for precision. Let the fire be swift, she murmured. Let the innocent not linger. Varn stood beside her silent. His gaze was fixed on the planet below. It looked almost beautiful now, its clouds catching the light of a nearby star. He wondered how many of those clouds were made by industry, how many by war. It did not matter. Soon they would all become one. Do you believe they will remember? Solen asked quietly. Who? The ones who die? The ones we kill? Do you think they carry memory into the warp? Varn's reply was slow, weighted. If they do, the Emperor will judge them by that memory, and us by the necessity of it. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. And if necessity was a lie, we told ourselves. He turned his head slightly, the faint light of his augmetic eye flickering. Then may he forgive us for believing it. The order came through the Vox channel, carried in tones of iron and ceremony. Exterminatus execution authorized. Firing sequence commencing in 40 standard minutes. Across the ship, klaxons wailed, not in alarm, but in liturgical rhythm. Crew members knelt where they stood, whispering invocations as if to shield themselves from the enormity of what they were about to do. The Judicium Aeternum's hull vibrated as the launch bays opened, exposing the cold vastness of space. In the command chamber, Varn placed his hand upon the ignition sigil. His gauntlet pressed against the runes of activation, and his voice filled the bridge like the tolling of a bell. By the light of the golden throne, by the will of the Imperium, and by the sanctified rite of the Ordo Hereticus, let the cleansing begin. The first torpedo launched, a streak of light tearing across the void, then another and another. Each one carried within it the power to shatter the crust of a world, to ignite its atmosphere, to erase all trace of life. The ship's systems tracked their descent, calculating trajectories in sacred algorithmic precision. On Bracchus IX, the people looked up. Some saw meteors, others saw omens. The ecclesiarchs in their towering cathedra told them the emperor's gaze was upon them. They were not wrong. The first impact struck the northern hemisphere. Light brighter than dawn flooded the clouds, turning night into a blinding sea of white. The shockwave traveled faster than thought, igniting oceans, tearing apart hive spires like paper. Seconds later, the second and third detonations followed, splitting the planet's mantle. From orbit, it looked almost serene, a blooming flower of fire expanding outward in slow, deliberate grace. Varn did not turn away. His reflection burned within the glass. Solène wept silently beside him. Even the servitors paused, their mechanical chants faltering as if their binary minds could not reconcile the scale of destruction. In the stillness that followed, no one spoke. The ship's auspex registered nothing but radiation and silence. The planet's vox signals ceased. Bracchus IX was gone. Varn stepped away from the viewport, his boots leaving faint prints of ash upon the deck. "Log the coordinates," he said softly. "Seal them in the archives under the writ of purgation." He paused before the shrine of the Emperor at the back of the chamber. The flickering candles painted his face in shifting gold. "May this sin be counted among the righteous," he whispered. Outside, the embers of a world drifted through space like dying stars. Hours after the last tremors faded from the ship's hull, the silence aboard the Judicium Aeternum grew heavier than the void itself. It was not the silence of peace, nor even exhaustion. It was the silence of aftermath, of something immense having passed through them, leaving only emptiness in its wake. The crew moved like phantoms, their tasks performed in whispers, their faces half lit by the dimmed lumens. Even the ship's machine spirits seemed subdued, their usual hum replaced by a muted static that felt like grief translated into sound. Varn remained alone in the sanctum, staring at the blackened sphere that now filled the hololith projector. Bracchus IX was no longer a world. Its surface had fractured into molten scars, oceans converted into vapor clouds that drifted into the upper atmosphere. The last remnants of its life glowed faintly in the dark, embers adrift in eternal night. The Inquisitor studied it as if trying to memorize its unmaking. Every world deserved to be remembered once, he told himself, even the damned. Solène stood at the doorway, her armor still bearing the dust of the observation decks. "It's done," she said quietly. "It was done the moment we began," Varn replied. His voice had no anger, no triumph, only the measured calm of inevitability. The fire merely confirmed what was already true. She hesitated before stepping closer. "The data archives will record this as heresy purged. The reports will speak of contagion halted, faith restored. But when the dust settles, who will know what really happened down there?" No one, he said simply. That is the point. Solenne's gaze lingered on the hololith, the image of the shattered world reflected in her eyes. There were children, she said softly, factories filled with them, servitors not yet finished. The lower hives never even heard the accusations. Varn turned to her. Faith demands cruelty, interrogator. Compassion weakens the flame. Do you doubt that? She did not answer. Her silence spoke loudly enough. The Inquisitor returned his gaze to the fading projection. I doubt it every day, he said after a long pause. That is why I am still human. The chamber's lumens flickered. For a moment, the shadows shifted as though alive. It was not uncommon aboard the ship. The residual warp interference of an Exterminatus strike often lingered for days. But still, Solenne felt the air change, growing colder, heavier. Magos Lexim reports interference in the Geller conduits, she said, grasping at routine. Residual psychic discharge from the detonations. He recommends a temporary quarantine of the upper decks until the machine spirits stabilize. Do it, Varn said. No transmissions until the readings normalize. The Emperor's work must not bleed into the warp. When she left, Varn knelt once more before the shrine. The words of the old litanies came to him not as recitations but as memories, things he had once believed without question. Through his light, we are purified. Through his will, we endure. He spoke them softly, but there was no answering sense of grace, only the hollow echo of his own voice. He thought of Herix III again, and of the others, the worlds that had vanished under his hand. He had never set out to become a destroyer of planets. He had once believed the Inquisition's role was to guard humanity from its enemies, not to erase its own reflection. Yet each mission had blurred that distinction further. How many times could one act in the name of preservation before realizing that the thing being preserved no longer resembled life at all? The ship's chronometers marked the passing of a standard day. On the observation decks, the crew gathered for the rite of closure. It was custom after every sanctioned purge, a way to cleanse the soul, or at least to pretend that one could. The ritual began with silence. The ship's main vox relays projected the low hum of an organ canticle composed of machine noise and psalmic rhythm. The sound filled the corridors, soft yet absolute. One by one, the officers removed their helms, exposing faces that had not seen natural light in years. Each of them carried a single shard of scorched glass, taken from the ship's external plating after atmospheric re-entry. They dropped them into a pyre of incense and blessed ash. As the shards melted, the scent of burning metal mixed with sacred oil, a scent that would haunt their dreams long after. Solenne's voice led the prayer. The flame consumes, the flame renews. In its ashes may we find his reflection. The crew repeated the words without emotion, their voices merging into a monotonous hymn. None of them truly believed in renewal anymore. They believed only in necessity. When the prayer ended, Varn dismissed them. He remained behind, alone once again with the stars. The viewport stretched endlessly before him, the void punctuated by distant suns. Somewhere among them lay Terra, the cradle of humanity, and its tomb. He wondered if those who ruled there still understood what it meant to give such orders, or if they too had become abstractions, thinking in numbers rather than souls. A faint crackle disturbed the silence. The ship's vox receiver flickered to life, unbidden. Static, low and rhythmic, filled the chamber. Varn frowned. Identify source. No reply came. The static continued, then shifted, warping into a faint modulation, almost melodic. A voice buried beneath distortion, repeating a single phrase. Burned, but not gone. He froze. The signal grew clearer, then cut abruptly to silence. For a long moment, Varn did not move. He told himself it was an echo, residual radiation from the planetary destruction. But something in the timbre of that voice lingered in his mind. It had sounded human, familiar even. He reached for the control rune, intending to purge the recording from the ship's archives. Yet he hesitated. Instead, he sealed it, classified under Cipher Omega Requiem, accessible only to him. Some truths were better preserved in darkness. When he finally left the sanctum, the corridors were empty. The ship's lights dimmed to twilight. He walked through the silence, past rows of statues carved into the walls, saints, martyrs, and inquisitors immortalized in stone. Each wore the same expression of serenity, each one bearing the same symbol of flame upon their chest. For the first time, Varn realized they all looked like mourners. He reached the end of the hall and paused before the great steel doors leading to his quarters. The ship's engines hummed softly behind him, steady and eternal. He thought of the billions who had once breathed beneath Bracchus IX's poisoned skies. Thought of their factories, their cathedrals, their whispered prayers, all gone, reduced to light and dust. And yet, something within him whispered still, something he could not silence. If the Emperor protects, who protects us from his silence? The thought came unbidden, and he crushed it before it could take form. He entered his quarters, sealing the doors behind him. The lights dimmed, leaving him alone with the faint reflection of his own face in the glass. For the first time in many years, Kestel Varn felt something close to fear. Not of damnation, but of the possibility that he had already been damned, and simply had not yet realized it. Outside in the endless dark, the fragments of Bracchus IX drifted slowly apart, their embers fading into nothingness. Before we descend into that revelation, remember, this channel is a chronicle of the forgotten and the forbidden. If this story of silence and fire moves you, then lend your strength to our cause. Like, share, and subscribe. For through your attention, the archives endure against oblivion. The void had always been quiet, but after an Exterminatus, it felt different, thicker, as if the silence itself had substance. The Judicium Aeternum drifted through that stillness like a cathedral unmoored from faith, its hull marked by the soot of its own deeds. Deep within its decks, the echoes of the crew's routines resumed with mechanical devotion. But something beneath the surface had changed. Whispers spread along the corridors, carried by the ship's recycled air and the nervous cadence of servitor hymns. The sound of a planet dying, it seemed, left an imprint even upon steel. Inquisitor Varn did not sleep. He had forgotten what sleep was. He spent his hours reviewing the codex logs, verifying every procedural sanctification that justified Bracchus IX's annihilation. It was the ritual that mattered now, the proof that what had been done was not sin but service. Each data entry affirmed the illusion of order, the verification of contamination, the authorization of the Conclave, the final vocal sanction. The words formed a lattice around his mind, holding back the chaos that threatened to bloom behind his eyes. The sound came again, that same modulation of static from before, faint but insistent, whispering through the vox channels like the dying breath of the world he had erased. He ignored it at first, then found himself listening for it, waiting for the distortion, the half-heard syllables that should not exist. Burned, but not gone. He had heard it clearly once, but memory had a way of betraying certainty. Perhaps it had never spoken. Perhaps it had only been his own conscience wearing the voice of the dead. Selena Care, ever faithful and wary, noticed the change in him. She approached him in the sanctum, her movements cautious, as if disturbing the air might draw unwanted attention. "You haven't eaten in 3 days," she said. "The Magos says your vital readings are erratic. You must rest." "I rest when there is no need for vigilance," Varn replied, not turning from the viewport. The stars reflected in his augmetic eye, a constellation of ghosts. "Tell me, Selene, when have you last known peace in the service of the throne?" She hesitated. "Peace is not for us, my lord." "Precisely." He smiled faintly, though it was a smile without warmth. "Then why should I seek it?" Behind them, the Mechanicus priests had gathered in the ship's forge deck. Magos Lexim had begun the post-purge maintenance, a ritual as complex as any Exterminatus preparation. The torpedo tubes were to be cleansed with holy unguents. The machine spirits appeased through the recitation of the binary canticles of renewal. To the uninitiated, it looked like work. To the faithful, it was worship. Varn descended to the forge decks later that cycle, drawn by the rhythmic drone of hymns echoing through the corridors. The heat was immense, radiating from plasma furnaces that glowed like captured suns. Tech priests moved in, solemn procession, their faces hidden behind masks of copper and brass. Each step they took was measured, their mechadendrites swaying in unison as they anointed the steel walls with sacred oils. Lexim turned as Varn approached, his photoreceptors flaring with recognition. "Inquisitor," the Magos rasped, his voice a blend of organic tone and machine resonance. "The ship breathes again. The spirits have been soothed. The echoes of destruction are being purged." "Echoes?" Varn asked, his voice sharp. Lexim hesitated. "Residual energy patterns from the Exterminatus event. Nothing more. Yet the data suggests unusual harmonics. Frequencies not consistent with conventional detonation, possibly psychic resonance. From the planet? Perhaps, or from us." The Magos' tone held no fear, only curiosity, but Varn felt something twist inside him. He turned his gaze toward the great plasma conduits that pulsed along the walls. The hum of energy there seemed almost a whisper beneath its rhythm, like distant chanting. He could have sworn he heard words within it, soft, pleading, human. He clenched his gauntlet until the sound vanished. "Continue your rituals, Magos. Ensure the conduits remain sealed." "As you command." He left the forge deck and made his way through the ship's central spine, where the corridor windows offered a view of the void. The remains of Bracchus IX still drifted there, a vast ring of glowing debris, slowly dispersing into cosmic dust. Some fragments shimmered with energy, remnants of atmospheric ignition. Others were dark and cold, spinning silently. Selene found him there hours later. "We've received a transmission from the fleet," she said. "The Ordo Xenos requests confirmation that the purge has been completed." "Send them the record," Varn said. "There's more." She hesitated. "A black ship is en route. They request docking to retrieve psyker cargo from the lower decks." Varn frowned. "We are not carrying psykers." "That's what I told them." "Then they are either mistaken or lying." He turned back toward the viewport, the reflection of his face merging with the drifting remains of the world below. Prepare the inspection teams. No one boards without my sanction. The black ship arrived 2 cycles later, its hull blacker than the void around it, its presence like an absence of light. No markings identified it beyond the sigil of the Inquisition etched faintly upon its prow. It sent no hails, only a silent docking request, which Varn accepted under protest. When the airlocks hissed open, the scent of ozone and sanctified oil filled the corridor. A delegation emerged, 3 figures robed in black, faces hidden by mirrored masks. Their leader spoke first. By authority of the Ordo Hereticus, we come to secure what remains. What remains is ash, Varn replied. The figure tilted its head slightly. Ash does not whisper through the warp, Inquisitor. The words struck him cold. Explain yourself. The moment your Exterminatus was executed, our astropaths detected an anomaly, a psychic echo originating from the dying world. The signal persists, fluctuating in the same frequency as your ship's transmissions. It should not exist. Solenne's eyes flicked toward Varn, her unease visible even behind discipline. A warp ghost? She asked. Perhaps, said the masked envoy, or something worse. Our duty is to contain it. Varn's mind raced. He thought of the static whispers, the haunting phrase that had reached him through the vox. Burned, but not gone. A coincidence, he had told himself. Now coincidence had a name. You believe the echo is sentient, he said. We believe it remembers. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the ship's engines. Then Varn nodded. You will have your containment, he said. But understand this ship remains under my command. No action is taken without my approval. The envoy inclined his head. As you wish, Lord Inquisitor. When they left, Solenne turned to him. You think they're lying? I think truth is a luxury men like us no longer afford, Varn said. He ordered the lower decks sealed. Servitors armed with flamers patrolled the corridors. The black ship's adepts established their containment rituals in the isolation vaults. Vast chambers lined with hexagrammic wards and adamantium locks. The chanting began, low and rhythmic, carried through the air by the ship's recycled breath. That night, the whisper returned. Varn woke from his half-trance to the sound of his vox grill activating on its own. The static filled the room, thick with distortion. He sat upright, his hand reaching instinctively for his bolt pistol. The sound pulsed in steady rhythm, then broke apart into fragments. Varn! He froze. The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was Solenne's. He rose from his bunk, activating the sanctum's emergency lumen. Solenne? No answer. The static deepened. Varn, the voice came again, clearer this time. You burned us, but the fire does not end. He slammed the vox control, severing the connection. The room plunged back into silence, but his pulse thundered in his ears. He checked the logs. No transmission had been recorded. No source identified. He stood there for a long time, the shadows stretching across the chamber walls like the hands of the dead. Somewhere deep within the ship, alarms began to sound. Red lumens bathed the corridor in arterial light as Varn moved swiftly toward the source of the alarm. The sound was steady and unrelenting, echoing through the decks, like the heartbeat of some wounded beast. Servitors clanked from their alcoves, their mechanical limbs twitching as they recited binary canticles of containment. The air smelled of hot metal and burnt incense, scent that spoke of both sanctity and failure. When Varn reached the isolation vaults, the airlocks were sealed. their surface etched with runes that pulsed weakly under stress. Magos Lexum was already there, his mechadendrites flaring with sparks as he interfaced with the containment consoles. Solène stood beside him, her bolt pistol drawn, her eyes fixed on the door as though she expected it to breathe. "What happened?" Varn demanded. Lexum's Vox grill crackled. Psychic interference within the containment matrix. The Black Ship's adepts attempted resonance calibration. Their wards destabilized. The machine's spirits recoil from the disturbance. Varn's gaze hardened. "Where are the adepts?" "In there," Solène said. Her voice was low, controlled, but her hand trembled ever so slightly. "No response since the alarms began." He approached the door, pressing his gauntlet against the cold metal. From beyond, a sound emerged. Low at first, almost like wind moving through a tomb. Then came the whisper. Not words this time, but rhythm, as if dozens of voices breathed in unison, the cadence of prayer but inverted. Varn stepped back. "Open it." Lexum hesitated. "That would be unwise. The interference may not be of mortal origin." "Then wisdom is irrelevant." The Magos inclined his head and activated the release sequence. The door's locks disengaged with a series of metallic groans. Steam vented from the seams as the portal slid open, revealing the containment vault beyond. The air was thick with ozone and the faint scent of scorched metal. The adepts of the Black Ship lay scattered across the floor, their bodies twitching in spasmodic movements. Their mirrored masks cracked. Their lips moved soundlessly, as if caught in perpetual invocation. The hexagrammic wards on the walls flickered, their lines of power broken in uneven pulses. In the center of the chamber floated the cause, a sphere of shimmering light, faintly golden, shifting in and out of phase with reality. Within its glow, fragments of imagery coalesced and dissolved, faces, cities, entire continents reduced to flickering memory. Varn recognized them instantly. Bracchus IX. The manufactoria spires, the streets, the people. The world he had burned now lived again, twisted into a psychic echo that refused to die. "Emperor preserve us," Solène whispered. Varn stepped forward, his voice steady. "Identify." The sphere pulsed in response. A voice rose from within, layered and indistinct, as though thousands spoke at once. "We remember." The chamber seemed to constrict around them. Solène raised her weapon, but Varn extended his hand. "No," he said, "it is not an enemy." Lexum's photoreceptors flared. "It is not alive." "Alive. Dead. Those are mortal definitions," Varn murmured. This is consequence." The light brightened, filling the vault with a blinding radiance. Images poured into their minds. Workers kneeling in prayer. The preacher's final sermon, the moment the sky became fire. 1 billion lives collapsing into light. Then came the voice again, clearer now. No longer an echo, but a single consciousness woven from memory. "You promised salvation," it said. "You promised flame would cleanse, but the flame endures. It burns within you." Varn staggered back, clutching at his chest. For a moment he saw himself reflected in the sphere, not as he was, but as something hollowed, his flesh cracked with firelight beneath the skin. Solène reached for him, but he waved her off. "Magos," he said through clenched teeth, "contain it." Lexum activated the suppression protocols. The chamber filled with bursts of white fire as the wards reignited, lashing out at the sphere with arcs of null energy. The light shuddered, its form fracturing. The voices rose into a scream that was not sound but sensation, a tidal wave of grief so immense it drowned reason. Then it was gone. The adepts fell still. The runes dimmed. The silence that followed was complete. Lexim withdrew his mechadendrites, his motions slower than before. Containment stabilized. Whatever it was, it no longer manifests. Selene knelt beside one of the adepts, pressing 2 fingers to his throat. "They're alive," she said. "Barely." Varn's voice was hoarse. "Quarantine them. No one leaves this deck without my command." As the others obeyed, he lingered at the doorway, staring at the faint scorch mark that remained where the sphere had hovered. The air still vibrated faintly, as if the echo had only retreated, not vanished. He touched his vox grill, speaking softly to himself. "Burned, but not gone." The phrase felt heavier now. Not accusation. Truth. That night, Varn recorded his findings for the Inquisitorial Archive. He described the anomaly in precise, clinical detail. Post-Exterminatus psychic residue detected. Possible manifestation of collective death imprint. Classification. Heretical phenomenon sigma. Recommend containment, not eradication. Yet even as he spoke the words, his voice faltered. He knew this was not heresy. It was memory refusing erasure. Selene came to him later, her armor unbuckled, her face pale. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she asked. "The voice." He nodded. "It wasn't demons," she said. "It wasn't warp-born. It was them, the ones we killed." Varn looked at her, and for the first time, there was no mask between them, no rank, no duty, no shield of rhetoric. Only 2 souls standing before the weight of their own actions. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was them? Then what do we do?" He turned toward the viewport where the last embers of Bracchus IX drifted across the stars like a dying constellation. "We listen," he said, "for as long as they allow us." The ship continued its silent voyage through the void, carrying within it the echo of a murdered world. The crew spoke less, prayed more. Even the servitors seemed slower, as if burdened by something beyond programming. In the observation decks, some claimed to see shapes forming in the debris fields, cities of light that flickered and faded when approached. Others dismissed it as optical distortion. Varn did not dismiss it. Each night he stood before the glass, waiting for the whisper to return. It always did. For 3 days the Judicium Aeternum drifted without destination, its engines humming in low communion with the void. The crew had grown withdrawn, their routines quieter, their hymns more subdued, as if the ship itself had lost faith in the words it once spoke. Fear was forbidden in the Inquisition, but what coursed through the vessel now was something purer than fear. Reverence twisted into unease. Men and women who had devoted their lives to burning away corruption now whispered prayers not to the Emperor, but to silence itself, as though hoping that if they remained still enough, the echoes would pass them by. Varn sat in his quarters, surrounded by relics of judgment. His rosette rested on the table beside a chalice of recaf gone cold, while in his hand he turned a small fragment of obsidian glass, a remnant taken from Bracchus IX before the last fires died. Its edges shimmered faintly, catching light that wasn't there, as if holding some impossible reflection of what it had witnessed. He couldn't stop staring at it. He wanted to believe it was only matter, only debris, but his heart knew better. Every Exterminatus left behind relics, but this was different. This piece was alive with memory. He felt it thrumming faintly against his palm, a pulse in perfect rhythm with his own heartbeat. And for the first time in decades, Kestel Varn felt something close to fear. Solène entered quietly, her shadow stretching long across the deck. She had shed her armor and wore only the plain robes of an acolyte, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness. "We've lost 3 servitors from the containment deck," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They went silent mid-task. No signal, no movement. Magos Lexim believes their logic cores overloaded. Varn placed the shard down carefully, as though afraid to wake it. "Show me." They descended through the ship's lower levels, past the observation galleries and into the labyrinth where the Inquisition kept its sins. The containment vaults were cold now, colder than they should have been. Frost rhymed the walls in delicate fractal patterns that resembled script, though none could be deciphered. They found the servitors kneeling in a circle around the scorch mark left by the vanished sphere. Their heads were bowed, their limbs folded neatly in prayer position. Their vocal units emitted a low harmonic hum, and as Solène approached, she realized they were mouthing words in unison. "Ignis Aeternum, Ignis Aeternum, eternal fire." Magos Lexim arrived moments later, his mechanical limbs twitching in agitation. "Their data cores are inert," he rasped, scanning their forms with his auspex. No command input detected. They arranged themselves thus without directive. Solène knelt beside one of them and pressed her ear close to its cracked vox grill. The voice that whispered out was not the servitor's own, but something buried deep within the static. It said only one thing: "We are not gone." She recoiled as if struck, her eyes wide. Varn studied the scene for a long time, saying nothing. The frost thickened along the walls as though reacting to their presence, spreading in slow, deliberate veins of ice that pulsed with faint inner light. "Seal this chamber," he said finally. "Purge it with promethium and lock it under triple sanction. If this is corruption, we burn it. If it is something else..." He paused. "So then may the throne forgive us for what we cannot understand." But the fire didn't end it. The promethium burned bright and holy. Yet when the smoke cleared, the servitors remained, untouched, unmoved, their forms blackened but unbroken. The runes etched into their metal skulls glowed with renewed intensity, casting ghostly light across the chamber. Magos Lexim muttered binary litanies in panic, his mechadendrites twitching as his faith in reason faltered. "It resists sanctification," he stammered. "This is impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Varn murmured, his gaze fixed on the frozen mark at the chamber's center. "Only forbidden." That night, the ship dreamed. Every lumen dimmed to ember. Every system pulsed with erratic rhythm, as though the Judicium Aeternum itself had begun to breathe. Crew reported hearing voices whispering through the ventilation systems. Not speech exactly, but something that resembled thought trying to form words. The name of the world they had destroyed echoed faintly through the hull plates. Bracchus. Bracchus. Over and over, carried by the vibrations of the ship's plasma core. Varn awoke to find his quarters bathed in faint golden light. The shard of glass he had left on the table now floated inches above the surface, humming softly, spinning in slow, perfect circles. When he reached toward it, a surge of memory struck him. Not his own, but the world's. He saw the manufactoria burning, heard the screams of the hives collapsing, smelled the dust of 10 billion dying prayers rising toward a sky of fire. And then, beneath it all, a single heartbeat. Vast, patient, eternal. The sound filled him, and for one terrible moment he believed it was the Emperor himself, whispering not in wrath but in recognition. He fell to his knees, trembling. The shard clattered to the floor and shattered, releasing a flare of light that faded almost instantly. When Solène rushed in, he was still kneeling, his eyes hollow. "My lord," she asked, "what happened?" Varn's voice was barely audible. "I saw it," he said. "The fire is not punishment, it's memory. Every world we burn remembers the moment it died, and that memory does not fade. It travels through us, through the ship, through every act of faith and every act of fear. The Emperor does not forget. He listens." Solène's brow furrowed, torn between faith and horror. "If that's true, my lord, then every Inquisitor who's ever ordered Exterminatus carries a fragment of the worlds they destroyed," Varn finished. "We are vessels of remembrance, not vengeance. And one day, the sum of all that memory will rise to judge us." The ship trembled violently then, as if reacting to his words. Vox alarms flared, lumen strips flickered, and the engines screamed like something alive. Across the decks, the servitor's chant grew louder, spreading in harmonic resonance with the reactor core. Magos Lexim's voice crackled through the comm. "Inquisitor, containment breach in the plasma sanctum. The machine spirits resist suppression. They're singing." Varn rose, his fatigue replaced by grim certainty. "They're not singing," he said. "They're remembering." He turned toward the door, his cloak catching the rising light that now bled from every seam in the ship's structure. The corridors pulsed with molten gold, shadows bending away from the radiance as though ashamed. Solène followed close behind, fear etched into her features. The void outside shimmered like the surface of molten glass, and in its reflection Varn thought he saw the shape of a burning planet. Not one, but many countless worlds superimposed over one another, all crying out the same name: Emperor. The Judicium Aeternum had become a vessel of ghosts, and somewhere, deep within its heart, the echoes of Bracchus IX awakened once more. They never knew the end had begun. To the people of Bracchus IX, the skies had burned before. Plasma storms from the orbital refineries, radiation bursts from malfunctioning reactors, even solar flares that turned the upper atmosphere to fire. The hive dwellers had long learned that the heavens could roar without meaning, yet this time the air carried a different weight. The light that fell through the smog wasn't the dull red of industry, but a blinding sacred white, the color of annihilation dressed as dawn. In Hive Magnetara, the highest spire pierced through clouds of soot, like the blade of a forgotten god. Inside its cathedra towers, the ecclesiarchy had gathered in prayer, their hymns echoing through the metal bones of the hive. The high confessor stood before a congregation of thousands, his voice a thunderous tremor beneath the vaults of gold leaf and smoke. "Brothers and sisters," he cried, "the Emperor's gaze is upon us. His light descends to cleanse, to renew, to sanctify." His words carried the conviction of ignorance. He did not know that the light descending from the heavens was not the Emperor's blessing, but his silence. Far below, in the sump levels where the light of day never reached, life continued in the dim rhythm of survival. There were children there who had never seen the sun, whose world was made of pipes and steam and the scent of oil. They played beside runoff pools, glowing with bioluminescent fungus, while their parents labored at broken machines that had long ceased to serve the Imperium's purpose. The sirens came at midday, long, wailing sounds that reverberated through the hive's hollow heart. At first, no one paid attention. Sirens were part of existence, Sirens meant quotas or shortages or simply the usual machinery of fear. But as they rose higher, their pitch changed. Not a warning, but a lament. An overseer named Kale was the first to sense it. He had worked the assembly line since boyhood, welding weapon parts for soldiers he'd never see. When the sirens began, he looked up through the grating above and saw something through the haze, streaks of light crossing the sky, silent and slow, their trails glimmering with fire. He felt his heart stop. The stories were true then, the ones the soldiers whispered when the drink was strong enough. The Inquisition's fire, Exterminatus. He ran. Through corridors of rust and sweat, past crowds gathering in confusion, past the preachers shouting for calm. He reached his quarters and a narrow alcove carved from the hive's wall, and found his wife still kneeling before their shrine. The icon of the Emperor glowed faintly, flickering as the power grids overloaded. "We have to go," he said, pulling her up. But she shook her head, tears cutting clean lines through the soot on her face. "Where?" she whispered. "There's nowhere to go." Above them, the first tremor shook the hive. It was not sound, but pressure, a wave that passed through the walls, through the air, through bone. The lights flickered, then failed. The hymnals in the upper levels fell silent as the power grids overloaded. Then came the thunder, deep and slow, rolling upward from the core of the world. Kale looked toward the ventilation shafts and saw the dust falling in waves, as if the hive itself were breathing its last. In the manufactoria chambers, servitors froze mid-motion, their logic cores disrupted by the electromagnetic surge. Conveyor belts halted. Sparks cascaded through the darkness like falling stars. The workers screamed as the first collapse began, a chain reaction of structural failure as the sub-levels buckled under the pressure of the quakes. The hive was dying from the inside. In the upper spires, the priests continued to chant. They believed the tremors were a test, that the Emperor's light would prove their faith. Even as the walls began to split and molten slag poured through the cracks, they raised their voices in exaltation. "He burns away our sin," the confessor roared, even as the ceiling cracked open and a torrent of fire fell from the heavens. The blast vaporized the altar, the confessor, the faithful, all transformed into a single column of light that reached toward the dying sky. Across the planet, the same story unfolded. The oceans turned to steam. The atmosphere ignited in brilliant arcs of white lightning. Hive cities erupted one after another, their towers toppling like candles in a storm. From orbit, it would have seemed beautiful, a planet shedding its skin of corruption, a perfect act of divine symmetry. But down below, there was only terror. A group of soldiers from the Astra Militarum stationed at Outpost Varn tried to contact command. The Vox units returned nothing but static. The Commissar ordered them to hold formation, to maintain discipline until evacuation orders arrived. They waited beneath a sky that began to bleed fire, their faces lit by the glow of distant impact zones. One by one, they began to pray. None of them had been trained for this. You could not fight Exterminatus. You could only die with purpose, or without it. When the firestorm reached them, the ground itself began to melt. The soldiers held their lace guns not as weapons, but as relics, the symbols of their belonging to something greater. Some shouted oaths, others wept. One young trooper, barely old enough to shave, looked up at the sky and whispered, "If you can hear us, my lord, take us quickly." The answer came in the form of light. Elsewhere, deep beneath the surface, the cult of the awakening flame gathered in the caverns of the Underhive. The preacher who had once defied Solen's pistol still lived in their memory. Her words had spread, even as her body burned. They believed the fire descending from the sky was her prophecy fulfilled, that the Emperor was not ending them but transforming them. They raised their hands to the molten ceilings and shouted, "Through flame we ascend." And in their final moment, they were right in their own way. They did ascend, their bodies lifted as dust into the burning wind. Even the machines did not die in silence. The manufactoria reactors, centuries old, overloaded in sequence, releasing tides of plasma that devoured the very foundations of the hives. The planet's crust split open like a wound, revealing veins of molten rock that glowed with the same white radiance as the torpedoes that birthed them. From space, it must have looked serene. From the ground, it was judgment given form. Amid that ruin, Kale and his wife reached the outer gantries, where the metal gave way to the open sky. The heat was unbearable. The air shimmered, the clouds aflame. He could see other hives collapsing in the distance, their spires falling like dying saints. She turned to him and said, almost calmly, "If this is the Emperor's will, then let it be." He wanted to answer, but words meant nothing now. He took her hand, and together they watched the sky open. The light came not as a roar, but as a breath, a gentle exhalation of final mercy. And then they were gone. Far above, aboard the Judicium Aeternum, Varn watched the feeds in silence. His face was expressionless, his eyes reflecting the same white fire that consumed the world below. Every Exterminatus was supposed to end cleanly. A detonation, a silence, an entry in the archive. But as Bracchus IX died, the ship's sensors recorded something else. Faint psychic waves, radiating outward, synchronized with the dying pulses of human life. It was as though every soul that perished had released a final thought, and all those thoughts had merged into one. The waveform resembled speech, though no one could decipher it. Magos Lexim analyzed the data for hours. When he brought his findings to Varn, his voice trembled through the vox. "My lord, the resonance pattern it's not random. It repeats in cycles. It's as if it's calling to us." Varn turned from the viewport, his expression unreadable. "Then we must answer," he said. He looked once more at the burning world, then closed his eyes. The glow of Bracchus IX faded into memory, leaving only darkness and the faint echo of voices carried through the warp. Not accusations, not pleas, but remembrance. For a moment, the Inquisitor could almost believe that the Emperor himself was listening. And then the light went out. There are moments when silence is louder than any scream, and for Inquisitor Kestel Varn, that silence had become a companion. Bracchus IX was gone, reduced to dust and memory. Yet its absence filled every chamber of the Judicium Aeternum like a lingering presence. The ship moved through the void without orders, without destination, as though even its machine spirits no longer knew where to go. To destroy a world was one thing. To live after destroying it was another. Varn found himself standing in the ship's chapel more often now, not out of devotion, but necessity. The great bronze statue of the Emperor towered above him, arms outstretched, face hidden in shadow. Beneath it, candles burned in rows, their flames flickering in the recycled air. He watched them with an intensity that bordered on madness, tracing the way they bent and wavered, how their light died only when the wax surrendered. That, he thought, was the truth of humanity. to burn until there was nothing left and then to be remembered only by the smoke. The theology of the Imperium left no room for doubt, yet Varn had begun to see its fractures. The Inquisition's creed was built on the sanctity of destruction: purge to protect, burn to preserve, erase to endure. But if every act of annihilation left behind a shadow, a psychic imprint that whispered through the warp, then what did it mean? Was the Emperor's light truly purifying, or merely the brightest mask of oblivion? Solène Care entered quietly, her presence grounding him for a moment in the tangible world. Her armor bore scratches she had not bothered to mend, and her hair had grown wild as if discipline itself had begun to slip. "The crew are restless," she said softly. "They speak of dreams, the same one over and over. Fire that does not consume, voices that call their names." Varn's gaze did not leave the statue. "Do you dream, Solène?" She hesitated. "I see the faces of the ones we burned. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them singing. But it isn't a lament, it sounds beautiful." "Beauty is the cruelest weapon of the warp," he murmured. "But what if it isn't the warp?" she asked. "What if it's us?" Her words hung in the air like a forbidden prayer. Varn turned to face her, and for the first time in years, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "We've built an empire on the ashes of our enemies," he said. "But perhaps those ashes remember the shape of what they once were. Perhaps faith itself carries the residue of all it destroys." In the lower decks, Magos Lexim had locked himself within the machine sanctum, surrounded by the whispering hum of reactor conduits. His augmetic fingers danced over the holokeys, drawing runes of logic and prayer. He had been studying the resonance pattern from Bracchus IX, the strange pulse that had outlived the planet's death. The data refused to vanish. Each time he purged it, it reappeared elsewhere, embedded in the ship's systems, woven into the new spheric fabric. It was not merely energy, it was intent. He transmitted his findings to the Inquisitor. The waveform adapts. It propagates through the machine spirits. It does not corrupt, it remembers. Suggest containment through isolation of cognitive cores. But Varn never issued the order. Containment would be meaningless now. The memory had already spread beyond circuitry, beyond mind. The crew themselves carried it, the echo of a billion souls lingering in their dreams, in their prayers, in their heartbeat. The next day, the ship's vox relays came alive with an unbidden broadcast. It began as static, then shaped itself into something almost human. A voice layered with thousands of tones, each one distinct yet unified. It spoke only one phrase: "The Emperor remembers." Every lumen aboard the ship flared at once. The plasma reactors roared, the Geller field wavered, and for a moment, space itself seemed to shimmer like a reflection disturbed by wind. The voice was not loud. It was infinite. The crew fell to their knees, some screaming, others praying, unable to distinguish worship from terror. Varn and Solène stood in the command sanctum, the light searing their eyes. "Is this his judgment?" she cried, her voice trembling. Varn could not answer. For a fleeting instant, he thought he felt the Emperor's gaze. Not the mythic radiance of divine order, but something colder, older. A consciousness vast enough to contain all the grief of mankind, watching through the veil of time and flame. It was not benevolence he felt, but awareness. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light died. The ship floated in darkness. Only the residual hum of the engines remained, slow and ragged like the heartbeat of a dying animal. the aftermath, the Vox recordings showed no trace of the message. Magos Lexim claimed data corruption. The priests called it a test of faith. But among the crew, rumors spread that the Emperor had spoken, not through the tongues of saints, but through the ashes of the damned. That night, Solène found Varn in the observation chamber. He was staring into the void where Bracchus IX had once orbited, his reflection fractured by the faint light of distant stars. "Do you know the oldest prayer of the Inquisition?" he asked. She shook her head. "It was never written," he said. "Only spoken before the first purge. It goes like this: remember not what we destroy, but why we destroy it." He smiled bitterly. "I think we've forgotten the difference." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're speaking blasphemy." "I'm speaking truth. And that is always blasphemy to someone." He turned away, his gaze drifting toward the shattered fragments still visible in the void. "If the Emperor remembers, then what are we? Custodians of his mercy, or witnesses to his sorrow?" The words struck her like a blade. She wanted to argue, to remind him of duty, of purity, of the purpose that defined them. But the fire in his eyes told her he had already passed the point of redemption. Over the next days, more anomalies occurred. Candles in the chapel burned without melting. The Vox relays played old prayers in reverse. The reflection of the ship in the viewport sometimes showed another vessel, a silhouette of gold, haloed in light, drifting parallel but unreachable. The Mechanicus called it sensor interference. The priests called it a miracle. Varn called it remembrance. He ordered all systems powered down, save life support. The ship fell into a state of quiet orbit, suspended above nothing, halfway between stars. The crew waited in darkness, speaking only in whispers. It was there, in that silence, that the final revelation came. The echo of Bracchus IX returned, not as sound, not as vision, but as presence. The air thickened, the temperature fell. Each lumen flickered as though bowing to something unseen. Varn rose from his chair, his breath visible in the cold. "Show yourself," he said. And the voice answered, not from the Vox, not from any speaker, but from within their minds. "You burn us, yet you preserve us. You erase, yet we endure. You think yourselves judges, but you are scribes. You write our names into eternity." Solène clutched her head, crying out, "It's inside me." Varn did not move. His voice was steady, his eyes distant. "If you are memory, then speak. What do you seek?" "Witness," said the voice, "nothing more." Then it was gone. For a long time, Varn stood motionless, the silence pressing against his skull. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "Prepare the archive," he said. "We will not hide what we have seen." "But the Conclave," Solène began. "The Conclave can burn me as they burned the world," he interrupted. "I will not deny what is truth. The Emperor does not forget, and neither should we." Outside, the stars pulsed faintly as though in assent. The theology of erasure was broken. The faith that justified fire could no longer stand upon the ashes of denial. And in that moment, Varn understood what few in the Imperium ever dared to imagine: that perhaps salvation and destruction had never been opposites at all, but reflections of the same divine act. Somewhere deep within the ship, the machinery began to hum a new rhythm, low and mournful, like the heartbeat of something awakening. The Judicium Aeternum had ceased to be a vessel of judgment. It had become a reliquary of memory. And as its engine stirred, Varn felt a strange calm settle over him. The calm of a man who had seen the face of truth and survived it, even if only for a little while. There are sounds that never end, only change their form. The Judicium Aeternum moved through the blackness between stars, and in its hull, the remnants of that sound, the dying whisper of Bracchus IX, still lived. It had been weeks since the light of the annihilated planet faded from the ship's scanners, yet the memory of it lingered in every crevice, in the slow breathing of the engines, in the rhythm of human footsteps on metal. To most, silence was the absence of noise. But here, silence had become a voice of its own. Varn no longer prayed. His litanies had grown into something quieter, thoughts spoken without sound, words that needed no audience. He walked the length of the observation deck, his reflection drifting beside him in the glass. Behind the distant stars, he imagined he could still see the ashes of the world they had burned, a faint haze that glimmered when the ship's lights dimmed. Sometimes it looked like clouds. Other times, like the wings of an angel. Selene Care sat at the console nearby, her hands folded in front of her. She no longer wore her armor. She had stripped herself of its weight, as though it had become a lie she could not carry. "The crew is gone," she said softly. "Most of them. Some fled to the escape pods, though they'll find no worlds close enough to reach. Others, they just walked into the dark." Varn nodded without turning. "They're not gone," he said. "They've joined the fire." "The fire?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "The echo that remembers," he murmured. "Every Exterminatus leaves behind more than ruin. The souls, the prayers, the cries, they fuse into something greater. The fire is not destruction, it is recollection. We are the ones who mistake it for death." Selene rose and approached him, the faint hum of the deck vibrating through her bare feet. "You sound like the heretics you once condemned." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps heresy is only truth spoken too soon." The ship's lights flickered. The void outside shifted, rippling like a reflection disturbed by unseen motion. For a moment the stars seemed to pulse in unison, and a faint radiance bled through the darkness, gold, warm, almost gentle. The light filled the chamber, and within it, Selene saw shapes forming, cities rising from flame, faces smiling through the ash, rivers of molten light flowing upward instead of down. It was not horror she felt, but awe, like standing at the threshold of something vast and ancient. "The Emperor's light," she whispered. But Varn shook his head. "Not his, ours. The echo of everything we have ever destroyed." The vision expanded, and for the briefest instant the Judicium Aeternum was not a ship, but a fragment of something much larger. A constellation of memories, bound together by sorrow. Every world the Inquisition had ever burned shimmered there. Every life ended in the name of purity. Every prayer silenced mid-breath. The voices did not accuse, they sang. And their song was terrible and beautiful beyond comprehension. Selene fell to her knees, her tears turning to light as they touched the floor. "What do they want from us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Nothing," Varn said. "They want to be known. They want to be remembered." The light faded slowly, leaving behind the soft hum of the engines and the faint scent of ozone. The deck felt colder now, the stars more distant. Selene rose unsteadily, her mind still reeling from the vision. "We should return to Terra," she said. "Tell the Conclave what we've seen. They'll erase it," he interrupted. "They'll bury it beneath protocol and doctrine until the truth suffocates. They'll call it madness or heresy or the touch of the warp. The Imperium survives because it forgets. It cannot allow ghosts to speak." "Then what will you do?" He turned from the viewport, his face illuminated by the dying lumens. "I will remember," he said, "even if it kills me." Over the next few days, Varn's behavior grew stranger. He spent hours alone in the sanctum, recording his thoughts into the ship's data core. Not reports or official logs, but confessions, fragments of revelation and remorse, woven into something between scripture and testimony. Solen would hear his voice echoing through the corridors, sometimes reciting prayers, sometimes whispering to someone unseen. The crew who remained avoided him, calling him the Prophet of Ash. Magos Lexim, half mad from sleepless calculation, reported that the ship's systems were no longer fully within Mechanicus control. "The machine spirits have integrated with the anomaly," he said, his mechanical voice distorted by static. "We are drifting through coordinates that do not exist. This vessel now navigates by memory, not by the Astronomicon." "The Emperor's light cannot reach us here," Solen said. "Perhaps we have reached him instead," Varn replied. In the days that followed, dreams spread like contagion. Every surviving soul aboard the Judicium Aeternum shared them. The same vision of a vast plain of light where the voices of the lost walked like living fire. Some wept upon waking. Others smiled as if they had seen something that no words could capture. The fear of damnation was gone. In its place was a strange serenity. Then came the final signal. It arrived through every channel at once, vox, astropathic, even the ship's lighting system, manifesting not as speech but as feeling. It filled their minds with the weight of eternity, with understanding that transcended language. And in that wordless communication they realized the truth. The fire that consumed worlds was not meant to destroy, but to gather. The Emperor's will was not erasure, but remembrance through purification. Humanity burned so that its essence could be carried onward, made one with his eternal light. The Inquisition had never been his hand of judgment. It had been his heart of memory, ensuring nothing was truly lost, only transformed. Varn fell to his knees, tears carving clean lines through the dust on his face. "All this time," he whispered, "we thought we were executioners, but we were archivists." Solen touched his shoulder, her voice soft. "And what will become of us now?" He looked up, his gaze distant. "We will follow them." The ship began to shake. The stars outside folded inward, their light stretching into ribbons of gold. The hull groaned like the cry of some ancient creature awakening from endless sleep. Lexim's last transmission crackled through the vox. "Reactor containment breached. Warp transition imminent. No coordinates, no..." The rest was consumed by light. The Judicium Aeternum vanished from the material realm, leaving behind no trace, no wreckage, not even radiation. Only a faint echo remained, a pulse of golden energy that rippled outward through the void. Some distant patrol fleet detected it centuries later, recording it as a warp anomaly of unknown origin. But among the astropaths who felt its touch, a few whispered that it was not anomaly but message, a heartbeat made of memory. They said that, for a brief moment, every soul within range of the Astronomicon felt warmth where there should have been nothing. A whisper carried through the warp currents, older than language, softer than light. "We are not gone." On Terra, deep within the catacombs of the Ordo Hereticus archives, a sealed data slate bearing Varn's personal sigil was discovered by a junior scribe centuries later. Its contents were fragmented, corrupted, almost unreadable. Only one passage survived intact, written in a trembling hand. To burn is to remember. To forget is to die. The Emperor does not destroy. He gathers. No one ever spoke of the discovery again. The data slate was sealed within the archives, marked with the sigil of Apocrypha Prohibitus. But those who had read it claimed that sometimes, when the vaults were silent and the candles burned low, they could hear faint singing echoing from within the sealed chamber. Human voices, countless and unified, whispering through the stone. They were not mourning. They were remembering. And somewhere beyond the reach of time and the light of the Astronomicon, the Judicium Aeternum drifted still, its hull wreathed in silent flame, its crew immortalized in the chorus of those they had once consigned to ash. The ship was no longer a weapon, no longer a tool of the Inquisition. It had become a monument, a cathedral built not of faith but of memory. For in the grim darkness of the far future, even fire can learn to sing.